Logging into the Apromore portal, I get an environment that's based on a directory structure. When going into the demo environment, choosing claims management, I will start a new project by just uploading a log file. When uploading the log file, I click the Browse button and choose the log file that I want to upload. By clicking OK, I get presented with a menu where I would choose if I want to reuse the last mapping that I did for this log file. Let's say yes in this case. Here I map at least 3 attributes. The case ID, that's the object that we're trying to follow. Could be a loan, could be a purchase order, could be an invoice. In this case, it's a claim. The other one is, as we see claim as an object, we can see the activity as a state change on the object. So what's happening to the object itself, you can see some things here like register claim, analyze claim, close assessment, and so forth. We have to map that particular attribute to activity. And then we need a start or an end timestamp. Here we can map the end timestamp to end timestamp. Furthermore, we map attributes like resources. We can map role to a specific cost center. We have the systems, processes, some event and case attributes. Once we finish mapping the file, we click OK, give it a name. We have a couple of events that we can see, and we can see here that the log file appears in the directory. Now let's click on the log file claims management as is. And what's happening here is that the process is shown to me in the form of a process flow. A couple of things that we can see straight away at the top here at temporal statistics. The average cycle time of the claims management process is a little bit over 3 weeks. At the log statistics here we see we have 608 claims in the log file, and they have 120 different variant ways of executing the process. We've got a little bit over 6,000 events, and we got 20 activities. Now looking at the process flow here, you can see that it's color-coded, and it's color-coded and it has sort of a number in the box as well. So what that means is we're looking at an overlay, and in this case we're looking at the frequency overlay. You can see that here. So we see the case numbers in the box itself. So register claim is executed 608 times. We have 608 cases. That sort of means that every case starts with register claim. Now, the darker the color, the more times that particular activity is executed overall in the execution of the cases. So by just following the color code, I can sort of find my happy path in the process. Now, looking at the process flow itself, we can see a couple of things here. Of course, we can see some things like we call ping pong effects. From close assessment, we see a lot of ping pong effects to amend assessments. So there's a lot of amendments made when we do the closing of the assessment. There's also customer info requested, and we see that happening here as well. Now, when we see these kind of effects and these kind of process flows, that might lead to finding some rework in the process. And the best way to do that is to change that frequency overlay from case numbers to maximum. And what we see now is, instead of the case numbers executed, we see the maximum times a particular activity is executed in a single case. So what we see here is that amend assessment is executed 12 times in at least one case. And this is sort of the first step in finding your rework. So what we can do here is we can click on the filter button. We get to the filter, we can look at our rework, find amend and assessment. You can see that here, that's executed 12 times, and put our SLA on top of that. Let's say that's 3. I don't want amend assessment to be executed more than 3 times while I'm assessing the claim. I click that OK, and then it will tell me in plain English what we just did. We retained all cases where activity amend assessment occurs at least 3 times. It also gives me a quick result here on the left. So that's 12.5% of all the cases. We click OK, and then we can have a closer look at the 76 cases that are in this filter. What we can see straight away is that everything is sort of recalibrated, right? Instead of 608 cases, I look at 76 cases. instead of 120 variants, I've got 44 variants, right? What I can also see is the average cycle time has changed dramatically. It went from 3 weeks to over 2 months. So what we have here is a group of cases that take way longer than the average. Now what we can do here as well is have a look at each of these cases individually. Sometimes customers want to go back into their applications and actually verify what's happening to make sure that we're looking at clean and correct data. Now, how we do that is we click on the number of cases, we get into the case inspector, and from there we can select one of the cases. And we can go through this particular case step by step, and hovering over each of these activities, we get all the information related to that particular activity. And of course, I can download this as well into an Excel spreadsheet to easily get all the case IDs to go back into the application. Once I'm finished with that, I can also delete the filter and go back to my standard view. Now, I haven't had a closer look at frequency and had a look at rework, found the rework, and sort of had a look on where exactly that's happening. I can now switch from frequency to duration. The color coding on the process itself is changing from blue to red, but the same thing applies. The darker the color, in this case, the longer it takes, right? So we can quickly spot bottlenecks in my process based on cycle time, because the darker the color, the longer it takes. And we can see that verify claim based on cycle time is a large bottleneck in the process. Besides that, amend documentation and finalize assessment take a long time as well. Now, besides cycle time based on execution of the process, we can also have a look at the transitions. So these are the arrows between the activities. And the darker the arrow, the thicker the line, the longer it takes to make a transition from one activity to the other. And we can see here that we have an activity, close assessment in this case, with a lot of incoming transitions that take a long time. Now this probably means that we found another bottleneck that's not based on cycle time, but that's purely based on resource and resource allocation. There's just simply not enough resources on the activity to perform the activity. And what's happening is that a lot of work is bubbling up in front of the activity. It's what we call dynamic wait time. Now, as we saw earlier, we could filter based on the cases. So we could filter out cases that sort of adhere to a certain attribute. What we can do as well is we can filter cases based on particular events, or what we call a vertical filter, where we just want to focus on a particular activity or a set of activities. And besides the filter button at the top here, we have shortcut keys for all of these as well. So I can do Control Option right click, and then I'll just looking at close assessment. Now the reason that I'm doing this, just looking at close assessment, because I want to switch the perspective here to resources. I want to know which resources are working on this particular activity. And when I slide the arcs here, I can see the handover between these resources, and I can see the frequency of cases that they take off the queue as well. Now, having a look at these three resources working on a particular activity, by deleting the filter in this case, I can have a look at resources and resource handover related to the bigger picture as well. So when I have the resources here, each box represents a resource, and each transition in this case represents a handover. So we can see the number of handovers, but we can also see the resources that take the most tasks from the queues. Switching to duration, we can see which resources take the longest time in this case, and which handovers take the longest time. So we can see here that the handover from Anna to Francois take a long time, 1.28 weeks. That's something to have a look at as well, because Francois has a lot of incoming handovers that take an awful lot of time. And of course, we can switch here from average to total if needed to get a picture based on duration, but in a different way. Another view that we can have on this particular process is based on cost. So what we can do here is sort of define the cost centers that are defined as roles here. I can define the different costs for each of these, and when finished, I apply the cost. What I can do now is I can switch to the cost overlay, and I can see which activity costs the most money. So you can see the cost overlay is green, and the same thing applies. The darker the color, the more expensive the particular activity is. We have the cost as an average here, but of course we can have the cost as a total as well, right? And then we can start switching cost with duration information. And this can be particularly powerful when we start switching perspectives. So let's have a look on how this will look when I switch to process stages. So not every process has a single owner. Sometimes we have to lift the process up and chop it into smaller pieces. That's what we did here. The total claims management process has the different stages: lodgement, assessment, approval, payment, and closure. What we can see here now is for each of these stages, we can see the lead time, the execution time, and the actual cost of each of these stages. So what we have here is actually very close to a value stream map, for example. We got all the information needed to create a value stream map. And of course, I can switch this to duration, then I can see which part of the process takes the longest, or I can have a look at that based on roles. So which is my most expensive role, or what handover between roles takes the longest, between operations manager and product manager, for example. I can have a look at cost in those overlays as well. Or I can switch it to systems, where I can see the handover between systems and the durations that I have there. Which transitions between systems take a long time. I might want to have a look at the integration between those two systems. So this is a quick overview of the process discoverer. Often we have more than one file we want to upload into Apromore. And for these situations, Apromore has a ETL tool which is completely no code. To upload multiple files, we click on the Create a Data Pipeline icon on the top. From here we can connect to different databases by using ODBC and JDBC, or we can upload local data files. Uploading the files is selecting multiple files and clicking on Open. Once uploaded, we can select them to make the connections. So what I'm going to do here is, for the claims management table, I'm going to connect two tables, one without case info and one with additional case info that's maybe coming from another system. The operator that I'm using here is an inner join, but as you can see, Apromore offers a full suite of SQL join types. So clicking on the inner join, I have to make sure that I'm making the connection via the proper IDs. Now, to this data set, which is now more rich, more complete, I also want to add some cost center information. And that cost center information sits in yet another table. And I'm adding an operation here, doing the same things, connecting claims management information to the cost center information, doing an inner join here again, and in this case, I'm connecting that through the activity. Once I'm done, I click Submit, and now I can see, color-coded at the top, which attributes I get from which tables, and I can do a quick inspection to see if everything went correctly. After extraction, I can go to the top and switch to the Transform step. Here I choose the attributes that I want eventually in my log file. I want all the attributes from this table and just the amount and the country from this table, and the activity I don't want, and I want the cost center from this table. Now you can see all the attributes are lined up here and connected together. Now there's a couple of things that I can do no code as well. Of course, I can change the name of the fields that are coming in, and maybe I want to call this claim amount instead of just amount. I can also edit the rules. I can edit rules on a particular column, as I'm going to do now. So I can, for example, say, all right, I want to create an if sentence here. I want to have a look at the country, and if that's equal to New Zealand, I want to give that a different value. I want to give it the value spelled out, New Zealand. So that's an easy way to add a rule to change the column values instantly. So you can see now, instead of NZL, I've got New Zealand here. The other thing that I can do is create a new column. And in this case, I might call that currency. Cut the column here, and now I can do the same thing. I can edit the rules. I can just do an addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. There are many different transformations that I can do on particular fields. In this case, I want to make it an if sentence again, and I want to check if the country info is equal to, let's say, Japan in this case. What I want to do then is give it a value of yen. And in other cases, I just leave the value empty here. Now you can add rules to this. You can build your own rule sets. You can do if then else rules. So there are many different ways of changing the columns that we have in our log file. I click OK, and you can see here that my additional column here has the value yen. Once I'm done with my transformation, I can go to the load step. This will give me all the fields that were in my different log files, and now I have to map them to the right attribute: cases, timestamps, activity, resources, system. I can make that an event attribute with perspective. Claim amount I will leave as is, country I'll leave as is, cost center, and currency. Once I'm finished with that, I can go multiple ways. I can save the pipeline so I can reuse it for later. Call it claims pipe. And I can manage my pipelines here as well. Of course, once I've done the mapping here, I can upload the log. Let's say I want to call it claims, and I want to put it in the home folder. Click upload. And now in the background, it will start uploading the file. Going back to the portal, into my home folder, I can see the claims file that I just uploaded, and the log file is ready to be used. After the investigation, it's time to report our findings back to the business. In Apromore, we use dashboards for this. To create a new dashboard, I right-click on the log file. Go to Launch Dashboard and create a new dashboard. When creating a new dashboard, I see the 50+ KPIs that come out of the box with Apromore. These KPIs are related to cases, activities, and resources. On the overview page, you can see all the information related to cases. You can see work in process, case duration, case variance, and the process flow for each case and case variant. When I switch to activities, I can see the case frequency, the average frequency for an activity, the minimum and the maximum duration, and each activity related to the cases and the duration. Switch to resources. I see the resources that work on the most cases, see the resources that work on the most activities, and of course I can see the resources that spend the most time on cases. I can see the minimum and maximum, and all this in a table as well. When I create a new dashboard, I'll click on the plus sign. I will now create a new dashboard from scratch. I will give it a name, and I will start by adding a tile. The tile comes up with the number of cases in my data set. but the tile itself has many different step types, from cases to case variance, case cost, and a case duration group. Let's say I want to get the case duration for a particular stage in my process. Maybe I want to see the duration related to lodgement and assessment. To do so, I need to put a filter on this particular widget. And I can go to filter log to do so. While here, I can reuse the filters that are already saved. You can see here I got a lodgement filter that I can reuse. I click OK and then apply the filter. You see it will now recalibrate based on the filter applied to the widget. By clicking on Add New Tile, I will add a new tile in the same row. What I can do, for example, is click on Copy Settings and then click on my new tile, and all the settings will be copied to the new tile. When I click on that and I go to my case duration group, I will see they are the same. What I will do now is change the filter. To do so, I can still go to my saved filters and now have a look at assessment, for example. I click OK and then click Apply. And again, everything here will be recalibrated. I now unselect the widget, click on the gauge, and it will add a new gauge underneath the two tiles that I already had in my dashboard. I'll click on my gauge, and here I want to have all the cases that are performed within 3 weeks. I can use a new filter for that, or I can use a saved filter. It's easy enough to create a new filter. We go into performance, we click less than equal than 3 weeks. Of course, we can use the slider as well to get the same result. We click OK, and we see now that we retain all the cases with a specific duration. Clicking OK again, applying that filter, and you will see it's applied to the gauge. Now what we can do here is put KPI thresholds on that. We can do that by using lower and upper bounds, mean and tolerance, or custom KPIs. We can do that with the case and the case numbers, or we can use percentages here. We can apply the KPI and then we can see how that works. Another one that we can add is, of course, just a normal bar chart. What I can do here is I maybe want to have a look at particular channel values. So I choose the channel on the x-axis and then have a look at case frequency, case duration, or case cost. I'll choose case cost in this case, change my column to a bar chart. You can see now I've got a bar chart here with online, manual, and email channels and the total cost related to each of those channels. I can now use total, or I can switch to average if needed as well. Of course, I can use a pie chart as well. Again, go into the case attributes, looking at the channels, and in this case maybe use another case attribute. And here we're looking at the claim value. We can have total or average. Let's have a look at the total claim value for each of these channels and put that in a pie chart. Again, you can see here we got bar charts, we got pie charts, gauges, and tiles. Another one that I can add underneath is maybe I want to see how my teams are performing when they perform their specific activities. So what I'm going to do now is on the x-axis have my activities, and then on the y-axis maybe have a look at the teams that I have in my set. Now once I have that set up, I can then switch and create a heat map. So now for each team I can see which activities they perform, Not only that, I can also see what the average duration is for each of these teams performing their activities. Also, I can go to the color settings and change the color settings if I want to. As you can see, there's a lot of different widgets that we can use, and there's a lot of different ways we can bring back the results from our investigation to the business. Once I'm finished here, I click done and I can save this as a new dashboard. The last thing that we can add is once we save the dashboards, we can save them as templates. And when these templates are saved, we can load them back up on the log file. So I can go to the KPI Center Claims, which is an out-of-the-box dashboard that we provide to our end customers. I check compatibility, I apply, say no, and the out-of-the-box dashboard for claims will pop up and will show for each of the stages in my process the cycle time, the sum of the claim value, the average claim value, and a lot of information about product groups, total claim values, and channels as well. So here we can save our dashboards as templates, and each log file that we have, we can overlay that information on that particular template, which could be a KPI center, or it could also be something related to a specific use case. In this case, we can have an automation center. So we can have a look at particular automation types and overlay that on a particular log file. Now here we can see, based on duration, which are the activities that are first in line for automation. And we can see that close assessment is a good example of that, based on the activity frequency and the maximum number of rework that's within the case itself. And then we can have a look at who's actually performing those activities. And we can see here that Francois, Carol, and Magdalena are performing this particular activity. Based on duration, we can have a look as well which activities are first in line for automation. And we can see here verified claim based on bottlenecks and duration. And again, here as well, we can see who's performing those particular activities and how long it takes them to perform those activities. So these are just a couple of examples that we have out of the box that work as templates that we can just overlay on each of the log files. It gives us an easy way to report back to the business and also to report back to particular units that are related to, for example, automation.